The wagon wheels groaned against the rutted trail as Clara Matthews guided her team through the dying light of an autumn evening. Wyoming territory stretched before her like a vast, unforgiving canvas painted in shades of brown and gold. The grasslands, once green with summer's promise, now bent before the October wind like mourners at a funeral. Behind her, in the wagon bed, 6-year-old Samuel clutched his younger sister Emma, both children silent as they had been for most of the journey from Kansas. Clara's hands, once soft from a life of relative comfort, now bore the calluses and cuts of 3 weeks on the trail. The reins bit into her palms, but she barely noticed. Physical pain had become a welcome distraction from the ache that had settled in her chest since that terrible night in Dodge City when Thomas had drawn his gun for the last time. The Broken Circle Ranch appeared first as a smudge of smoke against the purple-tinged sky, then gradually took shape. A cluster of weather-beaten buildings huddled against the base of the foothills like they were seeking shelter from the endless wind. Clara had never met Jake Matthews, her late husband's younger brother, but Thomas had spoken of him occasionally, usually after whiskey had loosened his tongue. "Jake's got the ranch," he'd say, with a mixture of resentment and resignation. "Pa left it all to him, seeing as how I took off for Kansas." As the wagon rolled closer, a figure emerged from the main house, even at a distance. Clara could see the family resemblance, the same broad shoulders, the same way of standing with weight shifted to one leg. But where Thomas had been clean-shaven and particular about his appearance, Jake Matthews looked like he'd been carved from the very mountains that loomed behind his property. His beard was thick and unkempt, his clothes practical and worn, and when he raised a hand to shield his eyes from the setting sun, Clara noticed the Winchester rifle held loosely in his other hand. "That's far enough," he called out when they were still 50 yards from the house. His voice carried the same deep timbre as Thomas's, but harder, like it had been weathered by solitude. Clara pulled the team to a halt, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd rehearsed this moment 100 times on the trail, but now the words stuck in her throat like dust. "I'm Clara Matthews," she finally managed, her voice cracking from disuse. "Thomas's wife? Was Thomas's wife?" The rifle lowered slightly. Jake stepped forward, his boots raising small clouds of dust. As he drew nearer, Clara could see his eyes gray like winter storm clouds, studying her with an intensity that made her want to pull her traveling cloak tighter around her shoulders. "Thomas is dead." It wasn't really a question, more a statement seeking confirmation. 3 weeks passed. There was a dispute over cards. The other men. Clara's voice trailed off. How could she explain the senselessness of it? The way Thomas had always been too quick to take offense, too slow to back down. Jake's gaze shifted to the wagon bed where Samuel's pale face peered over the sideboard. Something flickered across the rancher's features. Not quite sympathy, but perhaps recognition. "You'd best come in," he said finally, turning back toward the house. "Storm's coming." Clara looked west where clouds were indeed building, dark and ominous against the mountain peaks. She clicked her tongue at the horses, and they lurched forward, following Jake Matthews toward the cluster of buildings. The house was exactly what she'd expected, and yet nothing like it at all. Built of logs chinked with mud and straw, it squatted low and solid against the earth. The main room was sparse. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. A rough-hewn table occupied the center, and a narrow staircase led to what she assumed was a loft. Everything spoke of utility over comfort, of a life pared down to essentials. Jake moved to the fireplace, stirring embers that glowed like tiny red eyes in the growing darkness. "There's a room off the back," he said without turning. "Was going to be for—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "It's empty. You and the children can use it." "We won't be a burden," Clara said quickly. "I can work. I can cook, clean, help with the stock. The children, too. They're good children. They won't—" "We'll see." Jake's interruption was not unkind, but it was final. He struck a match, lighting an oil lamp that cast dancing shadows on the log walls. In the warm light, Clara could see him more clearly, younger than Thomas by perhaps 5 years, which would make him 30 or thereabouts. His face was weathered but not harsh, marked by sun and wind rather than dissipation. "You hungry?" he asked, and before Clara could answer, Samuel's stomach growled audibly. Jake's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "I'll take that as a yes." He moved to a pot hanging over the fire, lifted the lid, and stirred whatever was inside. The smell of beans and salt pork filled the room, and Clara realized she couldn't remember the last time they'd eaten a hot meal. As Jake ladled food into wooden bowls, Clara helped the children to the table. Emma, only 4, climbed onto the bench with difficulty, her little legs dangling far from the floor. Samuel sat beside her, his eyes never leaving Jake's face, as if trying to find his father in this stranger's features. "You favor him," Jake said suddenly, looking at Samuel. "Around the eyes." The boy's lower lip trembled. "Ma says I got his stubbornness too. That'll serve you well out here." Jake set the bowls before them. "Eat." They ate in silence, broken only by the scrape of spoons against wood and the pop of the fire. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and sending drafts through the chinks in the walls. Clara pulled Emma closer, feeling the child shiver. "Winter comes early here," Jake observed. "Earlier than Kansas. We'll manage." Clara lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. "Will you?" There was no mockery in the question, only a frank assessment. "This isn't Kansas, Mrs. Matthews. This is hard country. It breaks people who aren't prepared for it." "We've already been broken," Clara said quietly. "What's left can endure." Jake studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "The room's through there." He gestured toward a door she hadn't noticed before. "There's blankets in the chest. We'll talk more come morning." Clara rose, gathering the children. As she ushered them toward the door, Jake spoke again. "Why here? You must have people back east." Clara paused, her hand on Emma's shoulder. "Thomas's family in Pennsylvania made it clear they blamed me for his choices, my own people. They have troubles enough without taking on a widow and 2 children. And you think I'm different." She turned to face him fully. "I think you're blood. That has to count for something." Jake's expression was unreadable in the lamplight. "Blood didn't keep Thomas here." "No," Clara agreed. "But maybe that debt passes to his children." She didn't wait for a response, guiding Samuel and Emma into the small back room. It was barely larger than a cell, containing only a narrow bed and the promised chest, but it was shelter. And after weeks on the trail, it felt like luxury. As she tucked the children into bed, Samuel whispered, "Is he going to let us stay, Ma?" Clara smoothed his hair back from his forehead, feeling the fever warmth of exhaustion. "I don't know, sweetheart." "He looks sad," Emma murmured, already half asleep. "Like you, Ma." Clara's throat tightened. She kissed both children and settled herself on the floor beside the bed, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of cedar and loneliness. Through the thin walls, she could hear Jake moving about, the occasional clink of dishes, the scrape of a chair. The wind howled louder now, and she could hear the first spatters of rain against the roof. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, the sound raising goosebumps on her arms. This was indeed hard country, unforgiving and wild. But as Clara closed her eyes, she thought of the alternative, the suspicious looks in Dodge City, the whispers that followed her like smoke, the way even the church women had turned their backs after Thomas died. Here, at least, the judgment came from the land itself, not from the cruel tongues of those who claimed righteousness. Here, she could perhaps build something new from the ashes of her old life. If Jake Matthews would let them stay, if she could prove herself strong enough for this unforgiving place, as sleep finally claimed her. Clara's last thought was of the way Jake had looked at her children, not with resentment or coldness, but with something that might have been recognition, as if he saw in them not just his brother's legacy, but perhaps a chance at something he'd thought lost to him forever. The storm broke in earnest then, rain hammering the roof like bullets, wind screaming through the valleys. But inside the small room, pressed against the wall with her children close by, Clara Matthews felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks, the faintest stirring of hope. The cold hit Clara like a physical blow when she stepped outside at dawn. Wyoming mornings were nothing like Kansas. Here the air had teeth, biting through her wool shawl as if it were gauze. Her breath clouded before her face as she made her way to the well, ice crystals crunching beneath her boots. In the distance, the mountains loomed white-capped and forbidding, their peaks lost in low-hanging clouds that promised more snow before winter truly set in. She'd left the children sleeping, exhausted from the journey and the strangeness of their new surroundings. The water bucket was heavier than she expected, the rope stiff with frost. As she hauled it up, her hands already aching from the cold, she heard footsteps behind her. "There's a technique to it," Jake said, appearing at her shoulder. He took the rope from her without asking, his movements efficient and practiced. "You'll tear your hands up doing it that way." Clara stepped back, watching as he demonstrated a different grip, using his body weight rather than just his arms. He was dressed for the weather in a thick coat and leather gloves, a battered hat pulled low against the wind. "Thank you," she said stiffly, not sure how to read his helpfulness. In the gray morning light, he looked less forbidding than he had the night before, though no less remote. "Get yourself and the children fed," he said, setting the full bucket at her feet. "Then meet me at the barn. If you're staying, you need to know what you're in for." The barn was a massive structure, better built than the house. Clara noticed. Inside, the air was warmer, thick with the smell of hay and horses and cattle. Jake led her through, pointing out the different sections, the horse stalls, the milk cow's pen, the storage areas for feed and equipment. His voice took on a different quality as he spoke about the animals, softer somehow, less guarded. 20 head of cattle, he said, gesturing toward the far door that led to the pastures. Not much by Wyoming standards, but enough for one man to handle. Come spring, if the winter's not too hard, might be 30. "You've managed alone?" Clara asked, trying to imagine the work involved. 3 years now. He paused at a stall where a bay mare stood watching them with intelligent eyes. "Ever since Pa died, Thomas never said, 'I didn't know your father had passed.'" Jake's jaw tightened. "Thomas left before it happened. They hadn't spoken in 5 years. The weight of family history hung between them, heavy as the storm clouds gathering outside. Clara reached out tentatively to stroke the mare's nose, and the animal whickered softly. "She likes you," Jake observed. "That's Buttercup, gentle as they come. Your boy might learn to ride on her." They continued the tour, Jake explaining the daily routine, feeding, watering, mucking stalls, checking for injuries or illness. The list seemed endless, the work backbreaking, especially with winter approaching. "The real challenge comes with the snow," he said, leading her back toward the house. "Sometimes we get cut off for weeks. No way to town, no help if something goes wrong. Just you and the weather and the animals that depend on you." They were interrupted by the sound of horses approaching. 3 riders appeared on the trail, their mounts kicking up dust despite the morning damp. Clara recognized the type immediately. Townspeople, dressed too fine for ranch work, their face carrying that particular expression of those who traded in gossip rather than goods. Jake's posture changed subtly, becoming more closed off. "Mrs. Henderson," he said as the lead rider, a woman in her 50s with sharp features and sharper eyes, reined in near them. "Jake Matthews," the woman replied, her gaze sliding past him to fix on Clara with undisguised curiosity. "And this must be your visitor, Mrs. Clara Matthews," Jake said evenly. "My sister-in-law." "How convenient." "Mrs." Henderson murmured, in a tone that suggested it was anything but. Her companions, 2 younger women who looked enough alike to be sisters, tittered behind gloved hands. "We heard someone arrived last night. Naturally, we were concerned." "Naturally," Jake repeated, his voice dry as dust. "Mrs." Henderson's smile was all teeth. A woman traveling alone with children, seeking shelter with a bachelor. You understand how it looks. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks despite the cold. "I'm a widow, Mrs. Henderson. My husband was Jake's brother. Yes, we heard about poor Thomas. Such a tragedy, though perhaps not entirely unexpected, given his proclivities. The words were a slap, carefully delivered. Clara's hands clenched at her sides, but before she could respond, Jake stepped forward slightly, placing himself between her and the riders. Mrs. Matthews and her children are family, he said, his voice carrying a warning. They'll be treated as such. Of course. Mrs. Henderson replied smoothly. We simply wanted to extend our Christian welcome. The church does so worry about the moral welfare of children in irregular situations. Nothing irregular about family helping family. Jake said, Mrs. Henderson's eyes glittered. Indeed. Well, we must be going. Good day, Mr. Matthews, Mrs. Matthews. The three women rode off, their laughter carrying back on the wind. Clara stood frozen, the familiar sick feeling of shame and anger churning in her stomach. That's what you're in for, Jake said quietly. Town's about 20 miles east. Small. People have little to do but talk. I've dealt with worse, Clara managed, though her voice shook slightly. Have you? He turned to look at her fully. Because out here, talk can turn to action real quick. Those women's husbands control the bank, the general store, the freight company. You make enemies of them. Life gets hard in ways you can't imagine. Clara lifted her chin. Then what would you have me do? Leave? He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those storm cloud eyes. I'm saying you need to know what you're choosing. This isn't just about shelter. You stay here, people will talk, they'll make assumptions, and they won't be kind to your children. They weren't kind in Kansas either, Clara said bitterly. At least here the cruelty is honest. A ghost of a smile touched Jake's lips. You might be tougher than you look. Clara Matthews. I'll have to be, won't I? They returned to the house to find Samuel and Emma awake, huddled together by the cold fireplace. Jake immediately set about building up the fire while Clara prepared breakfast, cornmeal mush and the last of the bacon she'd brought from Kansas. Are there Indians? Samuel asked suddenly, his eyes on Jake. Some, Jake replied, not looking up from the fire. Shoshone, mostly. They keep to themselves if you don't bother them. Pa said Indians were savages, Samuel continued, with the casual cruelty of a child repeating adult words. Jake's hands stilled on the kindling. Your PA was wrong about a lot of things. Clara saw her son's face crumple and intervened quickly. Samuel, why don't you and Emma go gather some kindling from the woodpile? It's just outside the door. When the children had gone, she turned to Jake. He's just a boy. He's lost his father. And if he keeps talking like that around the Shoshone who trade at Miller's store, he might lose more than that. Jake's voice was harsh, but not unkind. This isn't Kansas. Clara, different rules out here. First one is respect for the land, for the people who are here first, for the weather that can kill you faster than any bullet. Then teach him. Clara said, teach us all. We're willing to learn. Jake looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. There's a storm coming. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Can smell it on the wind. We'll need to bring the cattle closer, check the fences, lay in more wood. You sure you're up for it? I'm sure we have no choice, Clara replied. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Jake showed them the woodpile, the root cellar, the smokehouse. He taught Samuel how to stack wood properly, how to check for snake holes, how to read the sky for weather signs. Emma followed them like a shadow, her small hand clutching Clara's skirt, as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Jake led Clara to a rise behind the house. From there, they could see the full scope of the ranch, the pastures stretching toward the foothills, the creek winding through like a silver ribbon, the cattle dark dots against the dying grass. It's not much, Jake said, but it's honest work, clean work. A man can make a life here if he's willing to fight for it. And a woman? Clara asked. He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. Maybe, if she's the right kind of woman. As they stood there, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of snow and sage and something wild that Clara couldn't name. She thought of Mrs. Henderson's knowing smile, of the challenges ahead, of 2 children depending on her to make the right choice. "I'll need to learn to shoot," she said suddenly. Jake's eyebrows rose slightly. "Will you now?" "If we're staying, yes, I need to be able to protect what's mine." "And you think this is yours?" Clara met his gaze steadily. "Not yet, but maybe someday, if we earn it." Jake was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Tomorrow. Then we'll start with the rifle." As they walked back to the house, Clara felt something shift between them. Not friendship exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. The mountains loomed dark against the fading light, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. But for the first time since leaving Kansas, Clara didn't feel entirely alone. The blizzard hit with a fury that made Clara understand why Jake had spent 3 days preparing. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed like a living thing, slamming into the house with such force that the walls groaned in protest. Snow didn't fall so much as fly horizontal, a white wall of ice and fury that erased the world beyond the windows. "Get the children to the main room," Jake shouted over the din, bursting through the door with an armload of firewood, snow covering him so thickly he looked like a ghost. "This is worse than I thought." Clara didn't need to be told twice. She roused Samuel and Emma from their bed, wrapping them in every blanket she could find. The back room was too exposed, too cold. Already frost was forming on the inside of the walls. "Are we going to die?" Emma asked, her small voice barely audible over the storm. "No, sweetheart," Clara said, trying to keep her own fear from her voice. "We're going to be fine. Uncle Jake knows what to do." Uncle Jake. The title had slipped out naturally, and if Jake noticed, he gave no sign. He was focused on banking the fire, piling wood nearby, checking the shutters that rattled like bones in the wind. "The cattle," Clara said suddenly. "They're still in the far pasture." Jake's face was grim. "Can't move them now. We'd never find them in this. Might not find our way back either." He paused, looking at her. "Some might make it to the sheltered areas. The rest." He didn't finish, but Clara understood. This was the harsh mathematics of frontier life. A particularly vicious gust shook the house, and something crashed outside. Lumber from the pile, Clara guessed, or maybe part of the chicken coop. Jake moved to peer through a crack in the shutters, then swore softly. "What is it?" Clara asked. "Barn doors come loose. If it tears off completely, we'll lose any animals sheltering there." He was already reaching for his coat, and Clara felt her heart lurch. "You can't go out in this. Have to." He was wrapping a scarf around his face, leaving only his eyes visible. "I'll tie a rope to the porch. Don't come after me, no matter what." "Jake." But he was already gone, swallowed by the white fury beyond the door. Clara pressed against the wood, feeling the cold seep through, straining to hear anything over the storm's roar. Samuel and Emma huddled by the fire, their eyes wide with fear. The minutes crawled by like hours. Clara kept one hand on the rope that disappeared into the storm, fighting the urge to follow it. Her imagination conjured terrible images. Jake lost in the white, freezing to death mere yards from safety, crushed by a falling beam. Then the rope jerked, and she quickly began hauling it in. Jake materialized from the storm like something born from it, ice hanging from his beard, his eyes the only part of him that seemed alive. He stumbled inside, and Clara slammed the door behind him. "Done!" he gasped, collapsing into a chair. His hands were blue-white with cold, and Clara immediately began rubbing them between her own, ignoring the painful tingling as feeling returned to both their fingers. "You're a fool," she said, her voice shaking with relief and anger. "Maybe," he agreed, his voice hoarse, "but a fool with a barn that'll still be standing come morning." As the storm raged on, they settled into estranged domesticity. Clara melted snow for water, made coffee that they stretched thin, prepared a pot of beans that would have to last until the weather broke. Jake told stories to distract the children, tales of mountain men and cavalry charges, of springs so hot they boiled despite the snow, of trees older than memory. "Did you know our PA?" Samuel asked during a brief lull in the wind. Jake's face changed, becoming distant. "I did. He was complicated. Ma says I'm like him." Samuel pressed. "You've got his look." Jake agreed carefully. "But you're your own person, boy. Don't need to carry his choices." As night fell, though it was hard to tell in the perpetual gray-white of the storm, they arranged themselves for sleep. The children curled together near the fire, Clara in the chair beside them. Jake took the floor, rifle within reach. Though what good it would do against this enemy, Clara couldn't imagine. Sometime in the deep night, she woke to find the storm had intensified. The house shook like a ship in a gale, and she could hear things breaking outside, trees, maybe, or more of the outbuildings. Emma was crying softly, and Clara gathered her close. "Story," the little girl whimpered. "Want a story?" Clara's mind went blank. All the fairy tales seemed too tame compared to the monster howling outside their door. Then Jake's voice came from the darkness, low and steady. "There was once a bear," he began, "who lived in a cave high in these very mountains. And this bear, he was the loneliest creature in all creation." He wove a tale of the bear finding a family of rabbits caught in a storm, of how he shared his cave and his warmth, of how they became his family despite being different species. It was simple, even clumsy in places, but his voice was soothing, and gradually Emma's tears stopped. "Did the bear stay lonely?" Samuel asked sleepily. "No," Jake said quietly. "No, he found out that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's just who shows up when the storms come." Clara felt her throat tighten. In the flickering firelight, she could see Jake's profile, strong and steady despite everything. She thought of Thomas, who would have been pacing, complaining, probably drunk by now. The comparison came unbidden and unwelcome, but undeniable. The storm raged for 2 more days. They lived in a small circle of warmth and light, the world beyond their walls erased. Jake taught Samuel to whittle, showing infinite patience as the boy's clumsy fingers struggled with the knife. Clara mended clothes by firelight, told Emma stories, and learned the rhythms of keeping a fire alive in a way she never had before. On the second night, with the wind still howling like all the demons of hell, Jake suddenly spoke into the darkness. "Thomas wrote me, before he died." Clara stiffened. "He did?" "Asked for money, said he'd gotten into some trouble, needed to make things right." Jake's voice was carefully neutral. "I didn't send it." "Would it have helped?" Clara asked. "No, Thomas was always looking for the easy way out. Money would have just delayed the inevitable." "You didn't like him?" It wasn't a question. Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I loved my brother, but I didn't like what he became. Didn't like how he treated—" He stopped. "How he treated me?" Clara finished. "You can say it. God knows everyone else has. A man shouldn't raise his hand to a woman, ever." Clara closed her eyes, remembering. The bruises hidden beneath high collars, the explanations that fooled no one, the relief she'd tried so hard not to feel when Thomas died. "I stayed," she said softly. "That's my shame." "No," Jake said firmly. "Your shame would have been letting him break you. You survived. You got your children out. That's not shame, that's strength." On the morning of the 3rd day, Clara woke to silence. The absence of wind was so profound it seemed like another kind of noise. Weak sunlight filtered through cracks in the shutters. And when Jake carefully opened the door, they gasped at the transformation. The world had been remade in white. Snowdrifts reached halfway up the walls, covered the fence posts, had turned familiar landmarks into alien shapes. The barn still stood. Thank God. But the chicken coop was gone, and several trees had fallen, their roots ripped from the frozen ground. "Well," Jake said finally, "could have been worse." They spent the morning digging out, creating paths to the barn, the woodpile, the privy. Clara worked alongside Jake, her muscles screaming protest, but she didn't stop. Samuel helped as best he could, while Emma played in the snow, her laughter bright as bells in the crystal air. The cattle were the hardest part. Jake found them scattered. Some huddled in the lee of rocks, others simply standing, covered in ice, still as statues. Of the 20 head, 6 were dead, frozen standing up, their eyes clouded with frost. "We'll have to butcher them quick," Jake said practically, though Clara could see the loss in his eyes. "Meat won't keep long once it warms up." It was gruesome work, made harder by the cold and the frozen ground. Clara helped as much as she could, trying not to think about the waste, the loss these deaths represented. Each cow was months of feed, potential calves, income that wouldn't come. As the sun set on their first day after the storm, they sat exhausted by the fire. The children were already asleep, worn out by the excitement and the work. Clara's hands were raw, her back ached, and she'd never been so tired in her life. "Thank you," Jake said suddenly. "For what? For not falling apart, for working, for—" he gestured vaguely. "For being stronger than you look." Clara managed a small smile. "I had a good teacher." "This is just the beginning," he warned. "Winter's barely started. There'll be more storms, more losses." "I know." She looked at her sleeping children, at the man who'd risked his life to save a barn door, at the fire that held back the killing cold. "But we're still here. That counts for something." Jake nodded slowly. "It does at that." Outside, in the moonbright snow, a wolf howled, distant but clear. Another answered, then another, until the night filled with their wild music. But inside the small circle of warmth and light, Clara felt safer than she had in years. Not safe from hardship or loss, those would always come, but safe in the knowledge that she'd found someone who wouldn't break when the storms came. "Tomorrow," Jake said, "we'll start teaching you to shoot. After this, I figure you've earned it." Clara nodded, too tired to speak, but as she drifted toward sleep, she thought she saw him smile, a real smile, warm and unexpected as spring after a hard winter. Outside, the wolves sang their ancient songs, and the world lay frozen and white and waiting. But inside, something new was beginning to grow, tentative as green shoots beneath snow, but just as determined to survive. The morning after the storm broke dawned brilliant and painful, sunlight reflecting off snow with such intensity that Clara had to shield her eyes. The temperature had risen slightly, causing icicles to form along the eaves, dripping steadily like a crystalline clock marking time. She stood at the window, watching Jake and Samuel work to clear more paths, their breath forming clouds in the still cold air. The beauty of the transformed landscape couldn't mask the devastation. Besides the 6 frozen cattle, they'd lost most of the chickens, and the root cellar had partially collapsed under the weight of snow. Every loss meant harder months ahead, fewer resources to see them through till spring. "Ma, I'm hungry," Emma said, tugging at her skirt. Clara smoothed her daughter's hair, mentally calculating their remaining supplies. "I'll make breakfast. Sweetheart, go wash your hands." She was mixing the last of their flour into biscuits when she heard the horses, 3 riders picking their way carefully through the drifts, the lead horse struggling to break trail. Clara recognized Marshal Coleman even before he reached the house. A decent man, one of the few in town who'd treated her with respect after Thomas died. Jake met them in the yard, and Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. She quickly wiped her hands and stepped onto the porch, Emma clinging to her skirts. "Morning, Mrs. Matthews." The marshal touched his hat. "Jake, hell of a storm." "Lost some cattle," Jake said shortly. "What brings you out?" Coleman shifted in his saddle, clearly uncomfortable. "Got some news from Kansas. Thought you should hear it proper." Clara's heart clenched. "What news?" "The man who shot your husband, name of Wade Garrison, he's been released. Judge ruled self-defense. Said your husband drew first." The world seemed to tilt. Clara gripped the porch rail. her knuckles white. That's not... Thomas may have drawn, but Garrison provoked him. Everyone knew it. Maybe so, Coleman said gently. But Garrison's got connections. His brother owns half of Dodge City, without witnesses willing to testify. There were witnesses, Clara said, her voice rising. A whole saloon full. None that would speak against a Garrison. Coleman's weathered face showed genuine sympathy. I'm sorry, ma'am. Thought you should know in case he decides to come looking. Why would he do that? Jake asked, stepping closer to the porch. Coleman hesitated. There's talk he blames Mrs. Matthews for the trouble. Says she encouraged her husband's gambling, that she's sitting on money that rightfully belongs to him from the game. That's a lie. Clara spat. Thomas lost everything we had at those tables. I know that. Coleman said. But Garrison's been drinking heavy, talking wild. Just be careful. After the marshal left, Clara stood frozen on the porch, rage and fear warring in her chest. It wasn't enough that Thomas was dead, that she'd been driven from her home. Now his killer walked free and might come seeking some twisted vengeance. Clara. Jake's voice was quiet. Come inside. She followed him numbly, barely aware of Emma's questions. Samuel had come in from the yard, his young face grave as he sensed the adult's tension. Pack your things, Jake said suddenly. Clara's head snapped up. What? You heard Coleman. If Garrison comes here, no. The word came out harder than she intended. No more running. This isn't your fight, isn't it? Clara laughed bitterly. My husband is dead. My children are fatherless, and now his murderer threatens us? When does it become my fight? Jake. When you can actually fight back, he said bluntly. You can't shoot, can barely ride. Then teach me faster. She met his gaze steadily. I'm done being prey. Jake studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, we start now. He led her out behind the barn where he'd set up targets, old cans balanced on fence posts. The rifle felt alien in her hands, heavier than she'd expected, cold through her gloves. Steady, Jake said, moving behind her to adjust her stance. Stock tight against your shoulder, or the kick will bruise you bad. She was acutely aware of his presence, the warmth of him in the cold air, his hands gentle but firm as he positioned her arms. It had been so long since anyone had touched her without anger or demand that she found herself having to focus on his instructions. See that notch at the end of the barrel? Line it up with the target. Breathe in. Let half out. Squeeze gentle-like. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, the sound splitting the morning air. Snow fell from nearby trees, and the can remained mockingly untouched. Again, Jake said simply. She fired until her shoulder ached and her ears rang, hit 1 can out of 20 shots. Her hands were numb, her frustration mounting with each miss. I can't do this, she said finally, lowering the rifle. Thomas said the same thing once, Jake said mildly. About most everything, come to think of it. The comparison stung, as he'd probably intended. Clara raised the rifle again, sighted, fired. The can spun off the post with a satisfying clang. Better, Jake said. Tomorrow we'll work on moving targets. As they walked back to the house, Clara noticed a rider approaching from the east. Her hand went instinctively to the rifle, but Jake shook his head. Doc Morrison, he said, probably making rounds after the storm. The doctor was a thin man in his 60s, with kind eyes behind wire spectacles. He dismounted carefully, favoring his left leg. Jake, Mrs. Matthews, he greeted them. Checking on folks after that blow. Everyone whole here? Lost some stock, Jake said. Otherwise fine. Morrison's gaze lingered on Clara's face, taking in something she couldn't guess at. You settling in all right, ma'am? Well enough, Clara said carefully. Good, good. He paused. I was sorry to hear about Thomas. He wasn't my patient, but still. You knew him? Clara asked, surprised. Treated him once, a couple years back. He'd been in a fight, Needed stitching. Morrison adjusted his spectacles. Mentioned he had a wife and boy back in Kansas. Seemed regretful about leaving them. Clara felt tears threaten and blinked them back. He was good at seeming. Morrison nodded slowly. Well, if you need anything, either of you, my place is 5 miles south. Can't promise I'll always be there, but my wife knows some healing too. After he left, they returned to the endless work of recovery, mending fences, hauling water, checking the surviving animals. Samuel worked without complaint, trying so hard to be the man of the family that it broke Clara's heart. Emma helped where she could, gathering eggs from the few surviving chickens, carrying kindling as the sun began its descent, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of rose and gold. Jake led Clara to a ridge overlooking the ranch. The view was breathtaking. The valley spread below them like a painting, the mountains rising majestic in the distance. Beautiful, Clara breathed. My father used to bring me here, Jake said. Said a man needed perspective now and then, to see the bigger picture. What do you see? Jake was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I see hard years ahead, more storms, maybe trouble with Garrison. Certainly more talk from town, but, he glanced at her. I also see possibilities I didn't before. Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest despite the cold. Jake, we should head back, he said quickly. Be dark soon. But as they walked down the slope, he offered her his arm over the rough ground, and she took it. It was a small gesture, practical, but Clara felt the significance of it. In this harsh land where survival depended on mutual support, such simple courtesies carried weight. That evening, as they sat by the fire, the children playing with wooden blocks Jake had carved, a comfortable silence settled over them. Clara worked on mending one of Jake's shirts, while he cleaned his rifle, occasionally glancing at the children with something like wonder. Can I ask you something? Clara said eventually. Jake nodded. Why didn't you ever marry? Start your own family? His hand stilled on the rifle. Never found the right woman, I suppose, and after Pa died, the ranch took everything I had. He paused. Told myself I was content with the solitude. And now, he looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara felt her breath catch at what she saw in his eyes. Now I'm not so sure solitude is all it's made out to be. A log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. Emma laughed at something Samuel whispered, and outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows. But inside, in the warm circle of firelight, Clara felt something fundamental shifting, like ice beginning to crack on a frozen stream. I should check the animals, Jake said abruptly. Standing, I'll help, Clara offered. No need. I want to learn. She insisted. All of it. If we're staying, I need to know everything. Jake nodded slowly. All right then. They bundled into coats and ventured into the cold night. The moon was rising, casting silver light over the snow, making everything ethereal and strange. In the barn, the animals stirred sleepily, their breath visible in the cold air. As they worked side by side, checking water, distributing hay, Clara was struck by how natural it felt, how different from the tension and unpredictability of life with Thomas. Jake was steady, reliable, his very presence a kind of shelter against the harsh world outside. Clara, he said suddenly, not looking at her. What Coleman said about Garrison. If he comes here, I want you to take the children and run, get to town, to the marshal, and leave you to face him alone. I can handle myself. So can I, Clara said firmly. Or I will be able to. We're in this together now. Jake, all of us. He turned to face her then, and in the moonlight filtering through the barn door, she could see the conflict in his expression, protective instinct warring with growing respect. You're not what I expected, he said finally. Neither are you, Clara admitted. They stood there for a moment, the space between them charged with possibility. Then Jake cleared his throat, breaking the spell. We should get back. Children will be wondering. As they walked back to the house, Clara noticed fresh boot prints in the snow near the fence line, prints that hadn't been there that morning. She started to point them out, but Jake's hand on her arm stopped her. "I see them," he said quietly. "We'll talk inside." A chill ran down Clara's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The peace of the evening shattered like ice, replaced by the reminder that danger could come calling at any moment. But as Jake ushered her inside, his hand protective on her back, Clara realized something had changed. She wasn't facing this alone anymore. Whatever came, weather, gossip, or Wade Garrison himself, they would meet it together. Spring came late to Wyoming, creeping across the landscape like a cautious animal. The snow retreated gradually, revealing the damage winter had wrought: broken fences, scattered debris, and the carcasses of animals that hadn't survived. But with the melting snow came wildflowers, pushing through the mud with stubborn determination, painting the prairie in splashes of yellow and purple. Clara stood in what would be her garden plot, turning the soil with a spade while Emma gathered rocks into a pile. The work was hard, but satisfying in a way she hadn't expected. Each turned spadeful was a claim on this land, a statement of permanence. "Riders coming," Samuel called from his perch on the fence. Clara straightened, shading her eyes. 6 men, riding with the easy confidence of those who owned the land they traveled. Her hand moved instinctively toward the rifle propped against the garden fence. Jake had insisted she keep it close, always now. Jake emerged from the barn, his own Winchester Casual in his hands. He positioned himself between the riders and the house, and Clara moved to stand beside him. Samuel and Emma behind them. The lead rider was a man in his 40s, well-dressed for the frontier, with cold eyes and a mustache waxed to points. Clara didn't need an introduction to know this was Ben Harrison, the biggest rancher in the county. "Matthews," Harrison said, not bothering to dismount. "Heard you've taken in boarders." "Family," Jake corrected evenly. Harrison's gaze slid to Clara, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "So I've heard, though the relationship seems, flexible." "State your business." "Harrison," Jake said, his voice carrying a warning. "Direct as always." Harrison smiled thinly. "Very well. I'm prepared to make you an offer on your ranch. Generous terms. Cash money." "Not interested." "You haven't heard my price." "Don't need to. Ranch isn't for sale." Harrison's expression hardened. "You're struggling. Matthews, lost cattle in the winter, no hands to help with spring roundup. How long do you think you can hold on?" "As long as it takes," Clara said, surprising herself by speaking up. Harrison's attention shifted to her fully. "Mrs. Matthews, isn't it? Or do you still go by your maiden name? I understand the relationship is somewhat informal." Heat rose in Clara's cheeks, but before she could respond, Jake stepped forward slightly. "You're on my land. Harrison, say what you came to say or move on." "I'm trying to help you," Harrison said, his reasonable tone belied by the threat in his eyes. "This ranch is too much for one man, and a woman with children. Well, ranching is dangerous work. Accidents happen." "Is that a threat?" Jake's voice was dangerously quiet. "An observation." Harrison gathered his reins. "My offer stands. Think about it. For the children's sake." They watched the riders leave in silence. Only when they were dust on the horizon did Clara realize she was shaking. "He wants the water rights," Jake said quietly. "My creek feeds into the river. Control that. He controls water for half the valley." "Will he?" "Maybe. Harrison usually gets what he wants, one way or another." Jake looked at her. "This is what I meant. About things getting harder." That night, Clara lay awake listening to the sounds of the ranch, the creak of wood, the distant howl of coyotes, the whisper of wind through new grass. She thought about Harrison's cold eyes, about the boot prints they'd been finding around the property, about all the ways this new life could go wrong. A sound from outside made her sit up. Footsteps on the porch, careful but not quite silent enough. She reached for the rifle Jake had insisted she keep by her bed, her heart hammering. The door handle rattled, then again, more forcefully. Clara slipped from bed, bare feet silent on the floor. She could see a shadow through the window, someone trying to jimmy the lock. Her hands shook as she raised the rifle. The door burst open, and a man stumbled in, not Harrison or his men, but a stranger, rough-looking and drunk from the smell of him. His eyes widened when he saw her. Well, he slurred. "The widow Matthews, heard you were a pretty thing." "Get out," Clara said, proud that her voice didn't shake like her hands. He laughed, taking a step closer. "Now that's not friendly. Came all this way to see you." "I said get out." She cocked the rifle, the sound loud in the quiet room. His expression turned ugly. "You won't shoot. Women don't—" The rifle bucked against Clara's shoulder, the shot deafening in the small space. The man yelped, grabbing his ear where the bullet had grazed it, blood running between his fingers. "The next one goes between your eyes," Clara said coldly. Jake burst through the door from his room, his own gun drawn. He took in the scene in an instant. Clara in her nightgown, rifle steady, the intruder bleeding and cursing. "You heard the lady," Jake said. "Get out, and if I see you on my land again, she won't need to waste another bullet." The man stumbled out, still holding his ear. They heard him crash through the brush, cursing loudly. Then the sound of a horse galloping away. Jake turned to Clara, and she saw something like pride in his eyes. "Nice shot. I was aiming for his head." Clara admitted, and was surprised when he laughed. "Ma?" Samuel's scared voice came from the back room. "It's all right," Clara called. "Just a coyote. Go back to sleep." Jake moved to bar the door, checking the windows. "He'll be back, with friends, likely. Then we'll be ready." He looked at her, hair loose around her shoulders. Nightgown modest, but still revealing more than proper. Rifle still in her hands, and something shifted in his expression. "Clara, don't," she said softly. "Don't say we should leave. Don't say it's too dangerous. I'm not running anymore. Jake." "I wasn't going to say that." He moved closer, gently taking the rifle from her hands. "I was going to say you did good, real good." Their eyes met and held. The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with possibility. Clara could smell soap and leather and something uniquely Jake. Her heart, still racing from fear, now raced for different reasons. "Clara," he said again, softer this time. His hand came up, fingers barely brushing a strand of hair from her face. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her. Wanted him to, she realized with a shock. But then Emma cried out in her sleep, breaking the spell, and Jake stepped back. "You should get some rest," he said roughly. "I'll keep watch." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. She gathered her shawl around her shoulders and moved toward the children's room, pausing at the doorway. "Jake, thank you for everything." He nodded, already settling into a chair by the window, rifle across his knees, a guardian in the darkness, steady and sure. The next morning brought new challenges. 3 of their cattle were missing, and they found fence wire cut on the north pasture. Harrison's work, most likely, or the drunk from last night seeking petty revenge. "We need help," Clara said as they repaired the fence. "Can't watch everything ourselves. Can't afford hands," Jake pointed out. "What about the Hendricks boys? They're looking for work, and their ma's one of the few in town who's been kind." Jake considered. "Maybe. They're young, but willing." As if summoned by their conversation, riders appeared on the horizon. Clara tensed, but Jake relaxed. "That's John Hendrick's horse." Indeed it was, not the boys, but their father, along with Marshal Coleman and 2 other men Clara didn't recognize. "Jake, Mrs. Matthews," Hendricks nodded. "Heard you had some trouble last night. Word travels fast." Jake observed. Ned Fowler sporting a bloody ear and telling everyone who'll listen that the widow Matthews tried to kill him. Coleman said, "Course, he's also admitting he broke into your house. So we figured you might need some help," Hendricks finished. "My boys are good workers, and these are the Miller brothers. They've got a small spread east of here, been having their own troubles with Harrison. Clara looked at these men, rough, weathered, but honest, and felt something ease in her chest. They weren't alone after all. "We can't pay much," Jake warned. "Don't need much," one of the Miller brothers said. "Just neighbors helping neighbors, the way it should be." They spent the day working together, mending fences, rounding up the scattered cattle, setting up a watch schedule. The Hendricks boys, Tom and Will, 16 and 14, were eager and quick to learn. By sunset, the ranch felt more secure than it had in months. As the men prepared to leave, John Hendricks pulled Clara aside. "My wife wanted me to tell you. She's organizing a quilting bee next week. You'd be welcome." Clara's throat tightened. After months of isolation, the simple invitation meant more than he could know. "I'd like that." That evening, as she helped Jake with the evening chores, he said quietly, "That was smart, about the Hendricks boys. We're partners." Clara replied, "Partners help each other think." Jake smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. "Partners," he agreed. As they walked back to the house, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Clara felt his hand brush hers. This time, she didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined, tentative but sure, and they walked in comfortable silence. The house came into view, smoke rising from the chimney, lamplight warm in the windows, children's voices carrying on the evening air. Home. Clara realized, somewhere along the way, this had become home. "Storm coming," Jake observed, looking at the clouds building over the mountains. "We'll weather it," Clara said confidently. "Together." He squeezed her hand gently. "Together," he agreed. As they reached the porch, Samuel burst out, excited about something he'd carved with Will Hendricks. Emma followed, chattering about the baby rabbits she'd found near the wood pile. The ordinary chaos of family life enveloped them, and Clara treasured it all the more for knowing how fragile it was. Later, as she tucked the children into bed, Samuel asked, "Are we staying here forever, Ma?" Clara smoothed his hair. "Would you like that?" "Yes," he said immediately. "Uncle Jake's teaching me to rope, and Will says there's good fishing in the creek come summer." "Then we'll stay," Clara promised, "as long as they'll have us." "I think Uncle Jake wants us to stay," Emma piped up. "He smiles now. He didn't smile before." Out of the mouths of babes, Clara thought. She kissed them both good night and returned to the main room where Jake was banking the fire. "No watch tonight?" she asked. "Tom Hendricks is taking first shift. We'll spell him later." Jake straightened, brushing ash from his hands. "Clara, about earlier." "Yes?" He seemed to struggle for words. "I'm not good at... I've been alone a long time." "I know," Clara said gently. "So have I. Even when I wasn't..." Understanding flickered in his eyes. He moved closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "I don't want you to think... This isn't about convenience, or loneliness, or..." Clara silenced him by pressing her fingers to his lips. "I know what it isn't. Jake, maybe it's time we figured out what it is." He caught her hand, pressing it to his cheek. His eyes were intense, searching hers for something, permission, perhaps, or understanding. Whatever he found there seemed to decide him. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he lowered his head. Their lips met, tentative at first. Then, with growing certainty, Clara's free hand came up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart race to match hers. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing unsteadily, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "Clara Matthews," he murmured, "you are going to be the death of me, or the life of you," she countered softly. He laughed, low and warm. "That too." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to fall. But inside, wrapped in Jake's arms for the first time, Clara felt only peace. They had survived winter, faced down threats, found unexpected allies. Whatever came next, Harrison's schemes, society's judgment, or nature's fury, they would meet it standing together, The ranch was no longer just Jake's refuge or Clara's last hope. It had become something new, a place where broken people could heal, where a makeshift family could grow strong, where love could bloom as stubborn and beautiful as wildflowers after a killing frost. The morning Clara decided to leave was deceptively beautiful. Dawn painted the sky in soft pastels, and dew sparkled on the new grass like scattered diamonds. She stood at her small window, watching Jake work with the horses in the corral, his movements sure and graceful. Everything about this place had become dear to her. Perhaps that was why she had to go. The whispers in town had grown louder. Last week at the general store, Mrs. Henderson had made a point of gathering her skirts when Clara passed, as if proximity might contaminate her. The minister's wife had removed Emma from the Sunday school class, citing concerns about moral influences, even kind misses. Hendricks had gently suggested that perhaps a proper arrangement might quiet the talk. But it was what happened yesterday that decided her. Samuel had come home from town with a split lip and torn shirt, refusing to say what happened until Jake's quiet persistence drew out the truth. The Harrison boy and his friends had cornered him, calling his mother names no child should know, saying she was no better than the women at the saloon. Samuel had fought back, outnumbered but fierce, defending her honor with his small fists. Clara couldn't bear it. Not her children suffering for her choices. Not Jake's reputation tarnished by association. She'd survived one man's legacy of shame. She wouldn't burden Jake with another. She began packing quietly, folding their few possessions into the same worn bags they'd arrived with. Each item hurt to pack. Emma's dress that she'd mended by the fire. Samuel's carved wooden horse that Jake had helped him make. The shawl Jake had bought her in town despite her protests. "Ma!" Samuel stood in the doorway, still favoring his bruised ribs. "What are you doing?" "Packing," Clara said, not trusting herself to say more. "But why? We belong here now. Uncle Jake said—" "Uncle Jake is a good man." Clara interrupted gently. "Too good to have his life ruined by gossip and speculation." Samuel's face crumpled. "This is because of what those boys said, isn't it? Because I couldn't—" "No!" Clara pulled him close, feeling him tremble. "This is because I need to protect you. Both of you. And Jake, too." "Protect us from what?" Jake's voice came from the doorway, quiet but intense. Clara's hands stilled on the pack. She'd hoped to be gone before he returned from the morning chores. "From the talk, from the judgment, from life?" Jake stepped into the room, his presence filling the small space. "You planning to run every time someone says something cruel?" "This is different," Clara said, not meeting his eyes. "They're hurting the children. Your reputation—" "My reputation was my own business before you came. And it's my own business now." He moved closer, and she could smell hay and leather and sunshine on him. "Or did I misunderstand what's been growing between us?" Clara's throat tightened. "What's between us is exactly the problem. People think, they assume. Let them assume." Jake's voice was fierce. "I know the truth. You know the truth. The truth doesn't matter when children are being bloodied for it." Clara's composure finally cracked. "I won't have Samuel fighting my battles. I won't have Emma shunned. And I won't have you." "Won't have me what?" Jake challenged. "Won't have you settling for us because we're here. Because it's convenient." Jake's hands came up to frame her face, cutting off her words. "Clara Matthews, you are the least convenient thing that ever happened to me. You disrupted my quiet life, filled my empty house with chaos, made me feel things I'd buried so deep I thought they were dead. If I wanted convenient, I'd have sent you on your way that first night." "Then why didn't you?" Clara whispered. "Because the moment you stood up to me with your chin raised and your eyes blazing, talking about endurance and broken things surviving, I knew I was lost." His thumb stroked her cheekbones gently. "Because watching you work yourself raw to prove you belonged here made me realize how empty the place had been. Because your children's laughter filled spaces in this house I didn't even know were hollow." "Jake, I'm not finished," he said firmly. "You think you're protecting me? From what? From the best thing that ever walked through my door? From the only woman who ever made me want more than just surviving another season? Clara's eyes filled with tears. But the town? Damn the town. The profanity was mild but shocking coming from taciturn Jake. If they can't see what I see, a brave woman raising good children, making a home from nothing, facing down every challenge this hard land throws at her, then their opinion isn't worth spit. You don't understand, Clara said desperately. The things they're saying, I understand plenty. Tom Hendricks told me what happened yesterday. Told me how Samuel wouldn't back down. How he said his ma was the strongest person he knew, and Uncle Jake was lucky to have her here. Jake's voice roughened. Boys got more sense than most adults. Samuel, still standing forgotten in the doorway, piped up. I'm not sorry I fought them. I'd do it again. I know you would, Jake said, not taking his eyes from Clara's face. Because you're your mother's son, stubborn as a mule and twice as brave. If we stay, it'll only get worse, Clara warned. Maybe, or maybe it'll get better. Maybe we make it better. Jake's hands dropped to her shoulders. But we don't find out by running. Clara felt her resolve wavering. And if they never accept it? If the children suffer? Then we teach them what you've already been teaching them, that other people's small minds don't determine our worth. Jake glanced at Samuel. Boy, go fetch your sister. This concerns her too. When both children were present, Jake knelt to their level. Your ma's worried about you, about what people are saying. Are you afraid? Emma shook her head immediately. I like it here. We have rabbits. Samuel was more thoughtful. Some of the kids are mean, but Will Hendricks is my friend, and Mr. Miller's teaching me to whistle like the Cowboys do. If you could go somewhere else? Somewhere people didn't whisper. Clara began. People whispered in Kansas, too. Samuel interrupted. About Pa, about the drinking and the gambling. At least here they whisper about something that ain't true. From the mouths of babes. Clara thought again. The thing is, Jake said seriously, if you stay, there's only one way to stop the whispers for good. But it's a big decision, bigger than just staying or going. Clara's heart began to race. Jake, he stood, turning to face her fully. I wasn't planning to do this with an audience, but maybe that's fitting. He took her hands in his. Clara Matthews, you came here looking for shelter. You found that and more. You found a place that needs you as much as you need it. You found a man who can't imagine going back to the empty life he had before. Jake, Clara whispered, tears streaming now. Stay, he said simply. Not as my brother's widow, not as a refugee. Stay as my wife. Let me raise these children not because I owe a debt to Thomas, but because I love them. Because I love their mother. The room went absolutely still. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Waiting. You love me? Clara's voice was barely audible. I love your strength. Jake said, I love your stubbornness. I love how you hum when you're cooking. I love how you bite your lip when you're concentrating on your aim. I love how you defend what's yours like a she-wolf. I love how you've made this cold house into a warm home. His voice dropped. I just love you. Clara, have for a while now. I think Uncle Jake wants to marry you. Ma, Emma exclaimed, clapping her hands. I gathered that, sweetheart. Clara said shakily. Is that a yes? Samuel asked hopefully. Clara looked at her children, brave Samuel with his split lip and shining eyes. Little Emma bouncing with excitement. Then she looked at Jake, steady, solid Jake, who'd offered them shelter and found himself offering his heart. The town will say I trapped you, she warned. That I'm a scheming widow who... Jake silenced her with a kiss, brief but thorough. Let them say what they want. I know better. Question is, do you? Clara thought of all the reasons to say no. The gossip would be fierce. People would assume the worst. There would be those who'd never accept it. Then she thought of winter mornings working beside Jake, of shared laughter over dinner, of the way he'd taught Samuel to rope and let Emma name all the barn cats. She thought of his hand in hers as they watched sunsets, of the safety she felt in his presence, of the way her heart lifted when she heard his boots on the porch. "Yes," she said softly, then louder. "Yes, I'll marry you, Jake Matthews, not for shelter or protection or propriety, because I love you too. Because somewhere between that first stormy night and this morning, you became home." Jake's face transformed with a smile so bright it took her breath away. He pulled her close, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around while the children cheered. "When?" was all he said when he set her down. "Soon," Clara replied, "before I lose my nerve." "Tomorrow," Jake said decisively. "I'll ride to town, get the minister, or the justice of the peace if Reverend Morris has objections. People will talk," Clara warned one last time. "Good," Jake said firmly. "Give them something true to talk about for once. How Jake Matthews was smart enough to convince the prettiest, bravest woman in Wyoming to marry him." Clara laughed through her tears, feeling the last of her resistance crumble. "I was already convinced. Have been for a while. I think I just needed you to say it." "Then I'll say it every day," Jake promised. "Every morning and every night, until you never doubt it again." Samuel tugged at Jake's shirt. "Does this mean we can call you Pa now?" Jake's eyes went suspiciously bright. "I'd be honored if you would. Both of you." As if choreographed, both children launched themselves at Jake, nearly knocking him over. Clara watched her little family, for that's what they were now, truly, and felt her heart overflow. The packed bags sat forgotten in the corner, testament to how close she'd come to running from the very thing she'd been searching for. Sometimes, Clara reflected, the greatest courage wasn't in leaving but in staying, in standing firm against gossip and speculation, in choosing love over fear, in building something lasting in a land that tested everything. "I should unpack," she said eventually. "Leave it for now," Jake suggested, his arm coming around her waist. "Sun's getting high, work to be done, life to be lived. Together," Clara added softly. "No other way I'd want it," Jake replied. As they stepped out into the morning sunshine, Jake and Clara side by side, children racing ahead, the mountains stood witness to a new beginning. Let the town talk, Clara thought. Let them whisper and speculate and judge. She had everything that mattered right here, honest work, good land, and a love strong enough to weather any storm. Tomorrow she would be Clara Matthews still, but wife now instead of widow. The children would have a father who chose them, who wanted them, and Jake would have the family he'd never admitted he'd longed for. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its liquid song, and on a small ranch in Wyoming, 4 people who'd found each other against all odds began the rest of their lives together. Summer arrived with a vengeance that year, turning the grasslands brown and brittle, the creek dwindling to a mere trickle. Clara stood at the well, hauling up another bucket that was barely half full, sweat beading on her forehead despite the early morning hour. The drought had crept up on them, each day a little drier than the last, until now, in late July, the land looked like tinder waiting for a spark. "Getting lower," Jake said, appearing beside her. His face was drawn with worry, though he tried to hide it. 3 months married, and Clara had learned to read the subtle signs of his concern, the tightness around his eyes, the way he rolled his shoulders when stressed. "How much longer can we last?" she asked quietly, not wanting the children to hear. "At this rate, maybe 3 weeks. Less if we can't find another water source." He took the bucket from her, his fingers brushing hers. Even that simple touch still sent warmth through her, a small miracle in their daily struggle. "I'm going to dig near the north pasture today. Sometimes underground streams run through there." Clara nodded, though they both knew it was a long shot. She watched him head to the barn for tools, his shoulders set with determination. They'd weathered storms and gossip, but this silent, creeping disaster might be what finally broke them. The morning passed in conservation water for drinking and cooking only, the garden abandoned to save what little they had for the animals. Clara taught the children their lessons in the slightly cooler house, though even Emma was subdued by the oppressive heat. "Ma, why doesn't God send rain?" Emma asked, her small face serious. "I don't know. Sweetheart, sometimes we have to make do with what we're given. Pa says we might have to sell some cattle," Samuel added, trying to sound grown up about it. Clara's heart clenched. They'd already lost 2 cows to the heat, and selling more would mean less income come fall. But keeping animals they couldn't water would be crueler still. The sound of approaching horses drew her to the window. Tom Hendricks was riding hard, dust billowing behind him. Clara felt her stomach drop. No one rode like that with good news. "Mrs. Matthews," Tom called, sliding from his horse. "Where's Jake?" "North pasture. What's wrong?" "Harrison's damming the creek upstream. Pa saw his men working this morning. If he finishes, you'll have no water at all." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Without the creek, even diminished as it was, they were finished. "Ride to the north pasture. Tell Jake. I'll gather the others." As Tom galloped off, Clara turned to her children. "Samuel, run to the Miller place. Tell them what's happening. Emma, stay inside." "But mind me. Emma, this is important." Clara grabbed the rifle from its place by the door and headed for the barn. She was saddling Buttercup when Jake arrived, his face grim. "You're not going," he said flatly. "I am." Clara continued tightening the saddle. "This is my fight too." "Clara." "We're partners, remember? In everything." She turned to face him. "Besides, you'll need every hand you can get." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Can you shoot from horseback?" "I can learn." Despite everything, that drew a small smile from him. "That's my Clara, always ready to learn." They rode out together, joined quickly by the Miller brothers and 3 other small ranchers Harrison had been squeezing. The makeshift posse was grim-faced and determined. Water rights were sacred in this dry land, and Harrison had finally overstepped. The dam was crude but effective. Logs and rocks piled across the narrow point where the creek ran through Harrison's land. A handful of his men stood guard, rifles prominent. "That's far enough, Matthews," one called. Clara recognized him as Dawson, Harrison's foreman. "You know this isn't legal," Jake said evenly. "Water rights were established when these ranches were claimed." "Mr. Harrison says possession is 9/10 of the law," Dawson replied. "His land, his water. The creek runs through his land." One of the Miller brothers spoke up. "Doesn't make it his to stop." "Take it up with the law," Dawson suggested with a smirk. "The law's a day's ride away," Jake said. "By then we'll have lost stock, maybe more. Not our problem." Clara had heard enough. She urged Buttercup forward, past Jake's reaching hand. "It's going to be your problem when half the valley turns against Harrison, when no one will work for him, sell to him, or buy from him." Dawson's smirk faltered slightly. "Big talk from a woman who shouldn't even be here. I'm here because this is my land too, my children's future." Clara's voice carried across the space between them. "And I'll fight for it just as hard as any man." "Clara," Jake warned quietly, but she wasn't finished. "You tell Harrison he has 1 hour to tear down this dam. After that, we tear it down ourselves." "And if lead starts flying, it's on his head." She wheeled Buttercup around and rode back to their group, feeling the men's surprised stares. Jake moved his horse next to hers. "That was either very brave or very foolish," he murmured. "Maybe both," Clara admitted, her hands trembling slightly on the reins. But someone had to say it. They waited, the sun beating down mercilessly. More riders arrived, word had spread, and other ranchers came to stand with them. By the time the hour was nearly up, they numbered close to 20. Harrison himself appeared then, riding up with more men. He looked older than Clara remembered, his face florid with heat and anger. "You dare threaten me?" he demanded, focusing on Clara. "I dare defend what's ours," she replied steadily. "Yours?" Harrison laughed unpleasantly. "A widow who married her brother-in-law for his land? You have no standing here." Jake started forward, but Clara put out a hand to stop him. I married Jake Matthews because I love him. But even if I hadn't, even if I was exactly what you think I am, it wouldn't change the law, or what's right. Pretty words. Harrison sneered. Let's see how pretty they are when... His words were cut off by a new arrival. Marshal Coleman, dusty and tired-looking, rode up with Judge Porter beside him. Heard there was trouble. Coleman said mildly. Judge Porter happened to be in town for the circuit. Thought we'd ride out and see what's what. Harrison's face went purple. This is my land. Yes, it is. Judge Porter agreed. But the water rights were established in the original claims. I have the documents in the courthouse. You can't dam a creek that provides water to downstream ranches. You know that. Ben, my cattle are dying. So are everyone's. Jake spoke up. That's what drought does. We share what's left, or we all go under. Easy for you to say. Harrison snarled. You've got that spring on the north side. Clara saw Jake stiffen. They'd found water that morning, not much, but enough to help. She hadn't realized Harrison knew about it. What spring? Judge Porter asked. There's an underground stream on my property. Jake admitted. Found it this morning. And you were planning to keep it to yourself? Harrison demanded. I was planning to water my stock first. Jake said evenly. Then see what was left. Gentlemen, the judge interrupted. And lady, he added, nodding to Clara. Seems to me there's a solution here. Mr. Harrison, you'll remove this dam immediately. Mr. Matthews, you'll share water from your spring with neighbors in need. Everyone gets enough to survive until the rains come. And if they don't come? Harrison challenged. Then we all fail together. Clara said quietly. But at least we'll fail as neighbors, not enemies. The judge nodded approvingly. Well said, Mrs. Matthews, Marshal. Oversee the removal of this dam. Any man who interferes will be arrested. Harrison looked like he wanted to argue more, but faced with the law and the united front of his neighbors, he finally gestured to his men. Tear it down. As the dam came apart, water began flowing again, not much, but some. Clara felt the knot in her chest ease slightly. They'd won this battle, though the war against the drought continued. That was well done, Judge Porter said, riding up beside her. You spoke sense when hotheads might have prevailed. I spoke as a mother, Clara said simply. We do what we must to protect our children's future. The ride home was quiet, each lost in thought. As they crested the rise above the ranch, Jake reached over and took her hand. You scared me today, he admitted, riding up like that. I scared myself, Clara confessed. But I couldn't just watch. This is my home too now. Our home, Jake corrected. And you defended it like a lioness. Thomas never knew what he had in you. Thomas wanted a quiet wife. Clara said, You married a partner. I married the woman I love, Jake said firmly, who happens to be braver than most men I know. That evening, neighbors began arriving with barrels and buckets. Word of the spring had spread, and Jake had made it clear all were welcome to share. It would mean harder work, longer hours hauling water, but it would keep the community alive. As Clara helped fill containers, Mrs. Hendricks approached her. That was a brave thing you did today, standing up to Harrison like that. Or foolish, Clara said wryly. Maybe, but it needed doing. The older woman paused. I owe you an apology. When you first came here, I listened to gossip, judged without knowing. I was wrong. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. We all make mistakes. Yes, but not all of us have the courage to face down the biggest rancher in the valley for our neighbors. Mrs. Hendricks smiled. You've earned your place here. Clara Matthews, don't let anyone tell you different. As darkness fell, Clara stood with Jake watching the last wagon roll away. The drought wasn't over. Wouldn't be until rain came, but they'd found a way forward together. Tired? Jake asked, wrapping an arm around her waist. Exhausted, Clara admitted. But it's a good tired. Ma! Pa! Samuel called from the house. Emma found a toad in the garden. Probably looking for water like everything else, Jake said. But he was smiling. As they walked toward the house and their children's excited voices, Clara marveled at how much had changed. The woman who'd arrived here last fall, broken and desperate, would never have imagined standing up to men like Harrison. But that woman hadn't had Jake beside her, hadn't had children depending on her courage, hadn't discovered her own strength in this unforgiving land. "Jake," she said softly. "Thank you for letting me fight beside you, for not trying to protect me from this." He stopped, turning to face her in the moonlight. "Clara, you've been fighting beside me since the day you arrived. Only difference now is you're doing it with a ring on your finger and my name attached. But the courage, the strength, that was always yours." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they pulled apart, both breathing unsteadily, she saw her future clear as the star-filled sky above. More struggles. Certainly more drought and hardship and people like Harrison who try to break them. But also this, partnership, love, family, and the knowledge that together they could weather any storm. "Come on," Jake said, tugging her toward the house where lamplight spilled warm and welcoming from the windows. "Let's go see this famous toad." Clara laughed, the sound bright in the quiet night. "Yes, Pa," she teased. "Let's go home." Autumn came like a benediction that year, bringing with it the rains that had been so desperately prayed for. Clara stood on the porch of their home, watching the drops fall steady and sure, turning the dusty earth dark and rich. The drought had finally broken in late August, just when they'd begun to fear the worst. And now, in October, the land showed signs of recovery. "Never thought I'd be so happy to see mud," Jake said, coming up behind her, his arms sliding around her waist. Clara leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest. "The garden's already showing green shoots. By next spring, you'd never know we almost lost everything." "We didn't, though," Jake murmured against her hair. "Didn't lose anything that mattered." It was true. The drought had taken its toll. They'd lost cattle, money, nearly a year's growth, but what they'd gained was worth more. The community that had pulled together, sharing water and resources. The respect finally earned from those who doubted. The bonds grown stronger through shared hardship. "Riders coming," Samuel called from the barn, where he was helping Tom Hendricks with the morning chores. The boy had grown inches over the summer, his shoulders broadening, voice beginning to crack. Clara recognized the lead rider immediately, Reverend Morris, accompanied by several townspeople. Her stomach tightened slightly. Even now, after all they'd been through, unexpected visitors could mean trouble. But the Reverend was smiling as he dismounted. "Jake, Mrs. Matthews, beautiful morning." "Reverend," Jake nodded, though Clara could feel the tension in him. "What brings you out?" "A proposition," Morris said, his weathered face kind. "The church is organizing a harvest celebration. A chance for the community to give thanks for the rain, for surviving the drought. We'd like to hold it here." Clara couldn't hide her surprise. "Here? Your spring saved half the valley." "Mrs." Henderson said, riding up beside the Reverend. The woman who'd once gathered her skirts to avoid Clara now smiled warmly. "Seems fitting to celebrate where the miracle happened." "Wasn't a miracle," Jake said quietly. "Just neighbors helping neighbors. Sometimes that's the biggest miracle of all." The Reverend replied, "What do you say? Next Saturday? Everyone would bring food to share, music, dancing for the young folks." Clara and Jake exchanged glances. To have the harvest celebration at their ranch was more than acceptance. It was an embrace by the community that had once shunned them. "We'd be honored," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. The week that followed was a whirlwind of preparation. Clara cleaned everything twice, baked until her hands ached, and fretted over details until Jake gently told her to stop. "It's just neighbors coming to visit," he said, finding her reorganizing the barn for the third time. "It's more than that, and you know it." Clara replied, It's them saying we belong." Jake pulled her close. We've always belonged. Just took some folks longer to see it. The day of the celebration dawned clear and bright, with the particular golden light of autumn that made everything seem touched with magic. By noon, wagons were arriving, families pouring out with baskets of food, children running wild with excitement. Clara watched it all with a full heart. Tables groaned under the weight of shared bounty pies and preserves, roasted meats and fresh bread, vegetables saved from gardens that had survived the drought. Musicians tuned their fiddles and guitars, and someone had even brought a small piano on a wagon bed. Mrs. Matthews. Judge Porter approached, his wife on his arm. Wanted to thank you again for your words that day at the creek. Clear thinking in a hot moment. Have you ever considered studying law? Clara laughed. I have my hands full with ranching. Judge. Pity, he said seriously. You've got the mind for it, and the courage. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the dancing began. Clara watched Jake swing Emma around, the little girl shrieking with laughter. Samuel was attempting to dance with the Hendricks daughter, both of them red-faced and stumbling. May I? Clara turned to find Harrison standing beside her. The big rancher looked older, somehow diminished. Mr. Harrison, she said carefully. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. And your husband, I let greed and fear make me forget what matters out here. Clara studied him for a moment, then nodded. Water under the bridge, Mr. Harrison, or over the dam, as it were. He smiled slightly at that. You're a remarkable woman, Mrs. Matthews. Jake's a lucky man. I'm the lucky one, Clara said softly, watching Jake now teaching a group of boys, including Samuel, some rope trick. Would you honor me with a dance? Harrison asked. Show folks there's no hard feelings, Clara considered, then placed her hand in his. It was a statement. She knew the biggest rancher in the valley dancing with the woman he'd once tried to run off. As they joined the dancers, she caught Jake's eye. He nodded slightly, understanding as always. As the evening deepened, lanterns were lit, casting warm pools of light. Clara found herself pulled into dance after dance with the Miller brothers, with Tom Hendricks, even with shy Doc Morrison. But it was the dances with Jake that made her heart soar, the two of them moving together as naturally as they worked side by side. Remember last year? Jake murmured as they swayed to a slow waltz. You showing up with barely the clothes on your back? I remember being terrified, Clara admitted. Of you, of the winter, of failing my children. And now? Now I'm home, she said simply. Ma, Pa! Emma ran up, tugging at their clothes. Samuel says there's shooting stars. Can we watch? They climbed to the rise behind the house, the same spot where Jake had first shown Clara the full scope of the ranch. Now it was filled with neighbors and friends, all gazing up at the star-filled sky as meteors streaked across like silver threads. Make a wish, Emma, Clara said, lifting her daughter to see better. I wish we could stay here forever and ever. Emma said promptly, That's a good wish, little one, Jake said, his arm coming around them both. Samuel stood slightly apart, trying to look grown up, but he didn't protest when Jake pulled him into their circle. What did you wish for, Samuel? Clara asked. He was quiet for a moment. I wished my real PA could see us now. See how happy we are. Maybe then he'd understand why we had to leave. Clara's throat tightened. I think he knows. Sweetheart, I think he'd be glad you found a good man to raise you. Jake's the best PA, Samuel said matter-of-factly. He teaches me things and never gets mad when I mess up. Jake cleared his throat roughly. You're good kids. Both of you. Any man would be proud to call you his. As the meteor shower continued, Clara looked around at the gathering. These people who had judged her, gossiped about her. Some who had tried to drive her away. Now they stood together under the same stars, united by shared struggles and common ground. Mrs. Hendricks appeared at her elbow. It's a fine thing you and Jake have built here. We had help, Clara said. From you, From others, we couldn't have made it alone. None of us can. The older woman agreed. That's what Harrison forgot. What we all sometimes forget, but drought has a way of reminding us what matters. Later, as the celebration wound down and families began loading wagons for the journey home, Clara and Jake stood at their door, accepting thanks and farewells. Person after person mentioned the spring, the shared water, the way they'd stood up to Harrison. But more than that, they talked about the future plans for next year's planting, hopes for good rain, children's upcoming milestones. You're part of the valley now. Old Mister, Miller said, shaking Jake's hand. Both of you. Roots run deep after a season like we've had. Finally, as the last wagon rolled away and the children were tucked into bed, exhausted from excitement, Clara and Jake sat on their porch in the quiet night. Was it what you expected? Jake asked. When you came here? Clara laughed softly. I didn't expect anything. I was just trying to survive one day at a time. And now, she turned to look at him. This man who'd given her shelter and then his heart. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else. With anyone else. Jake pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, an owl hooting, coyotes singing in the distance, the whisper of wind through grass that was green again. Thank you, Clara said suddenly. For what? For that day when you said stay, for seeing something in us worth fighting for. Clara, Jake said seriously, you've got it backwards. You three saved me, gave me something to fight for besides just getting through another season, gave me a family. She kissed him then, soft and sweet, tasting the apple cider they'd shared and the promise of all the years to come, as they finally rose to go inside. Clara paused, looking back at the yard where hours before it had been filled with music and laughter. The tables were cleared, the lanterns extinguished, but she could still feel the warmth of community, of acceptance, of home. Next year, Jake said, reading her thoughts as he so often did. It'll be even better, more to celebrate. Every year, Clara agreed. For the rest of our lives. They went inside together, to the home they'd built from tragedy and hope, where two broken people had found wholeness in each other, where children played and grew strong, where love had taken root as surely as the prairie grass after rain. From the window, the mountains stood sentinel against the star-bright sky, eternal and enduring. And in the valley below, a small ranch house glowed with lamplight and love, a beacon of what was possible when people chose courage over fear, community over isolation, and love over all. The West would always be wild, always be hard, but for Clara and Jake Matthews and their children, it was also home, and that made all the difference. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining me on this journey through the wild frontier of love and resilience. I'm curious, where in the world are you listening to this story? Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles, just as our characters connected across their differences. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Clara and Jake's story. What touched your heart? What reminded you of your own journey? I'd love to hear from you.